Okay, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Campfire. I'm Sahil, aka Steven, one of your podcast hosts, along with my co-host Will. And today we are going to get into a historic place that has recently been vandalized. Actually, Will, you want to
Yeah.
tell us what we're talking about?
We're going to be talking about another great mystery. I feel like probably one of the biggest mysteries out there, and that is Stonehenge. Who built Stonehenge? Why was Stonehenge even built? So we're going to be diving into that today. Um, so yeah, trying to think any announcements we got to do before we start.
Yeah,
Um,
I would just say, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Our handles there are, I believe, on Instagram, it is Beyond Campfire, BeyondCampfire. And then on other places, it's at Beyond the Campfire podcast. So make sure to give us a follow. Um, but yeah, as me and Will alluded to earlier, last week Stonehenge was vandalized. There was some climate activists, I would call them climate terrorists, that came in and with a fire extinguisher full of orange powder, uh, spray painted a lot of Stonehenge orange. I'm pretty sure they're working on cleaning it up. I haven't really looked at the cleanup
mhm.
efforts, but I watched a video of this climate terrorist running up and uh, throwing that on there. And, I mean, climate change, maybe Will, you and me disagree on this, but I do think there's some level of climate change caused by humans, and yeah, I think maybe governments could do better policy in thinking that. But spray painting Stonehenge orange, like, how does that?
Stonehenge did nothing.
Yeah, how does that further your goals? So I don't know that that bothers me.
So as Steven said, we're going to be talking about Stonehenge today. Yeah, this is probably going to be a little bit like the Mary Celeste episode where there's going to be a small amount of history and then a whole bunch of us debating and discussing theories. Because when I looked, we really don't know a lot about Stonehenge. The earliest like known structures for Stonehenge actually only date back 85 to 7000 BC. So not that long ago. I mean, that's almost 8,000 or 9,000 to 10,000 years ago, which isn't a whole lot of time. And these early structures were like they would dig these pits, and these pits would have almost like a pine totem pole, and that's kind of what early Stonehenge was. I think we found a couple of these ruins scattered near where Stonehenge is. Um, Upon my research, because I used the English Heritage website, and there was another place called Robin Hood's Ball, which was an enclosure, and it had two ditches kind of dug around in circles. And a lot of people, this could also kind of allude maybe to what Stonehenge was used for. The theories for Robin Hood was it was used for feasts, like exchanges of goods and possibly ceremonies. So, kind of looking there, you kind of get a little idea maybe what Stonehenge could be about. Um, Now, as for Stonehenge, the one we know today, it's crazy because Stonehenge didn't just pop up overnight. Um, it took a little bit of time. Um, it started out in 3000 BC. 3000 BC, you kind of get almost like these ditches are dug. So they kind of dig these like circle ditches with two entrances. And then along the ditches, they dig these 56 pits, and they're called the Aubrey holes. And we don't know what they held. So this is again where some more debate starts of what was held within these pits. Some people say it was wood, some people would say it was stone. And so this structure lasted for about 500 years at max. And then that's when we started getting our Stonehenge we know today. Any thoughts before we get deeper?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point of how old Stonehenge is. It's definitely one of the most oldest just monuments that we have today. I mean, 5,000 years ago, that's before Jesus. That's before the vast majority of the Old Testament, that's before so much of written. That's before the Bronze Age.
Yeah.
Like we're going way back in history when
Yep.
Stonehenge is first created. So when you're thinking about Stonehenge being set up and where we are today in the year of our Lord 2024, so much stuff has happened.
Oh yeah. And it's going to get kind of wild to kind of think. I want you guys to kind of hold in your head. Like I said, this is 2500 BC was when Stonehenge started being built. So it's 2500 BC. So it's 2500 years before Christ was born. Um, I think the Great Pyramids might have been built around that time. Um, but it's kind of crazy to think because, while Egypt has its ongoings, while the Persian Empire, while all these empires are ongoing, not a lot has happened in England. It's mostly still primitive people that are going on. So it gets a little crazy when you find out how Stonehenge was built, where the stones came from. Um, so in 2500 BC, the stones were kind of set. That's when they kind of went ahead, put the stones in. And that's basically the structure we know today. There are two types of stones that are used. The larger ones are called serenes, and the smaller ones are called the blue stones. So the serene stones, those bigger stones, are the ones that were arranged. They were arranged in two formations. You have the outer circle, and then you have an inner horseshoe. Um, and then in between those were the blue stones. The blue stones were set. And apparently there was an altar at the end of the horseshoe. So when you kind of walk through the circle stones, you got into the horseshoe, and at the base of the horseshoe was an altar. Now, here's where it gets kind of crazy. Oh, sorry, skipped over a little bit. So the Saracens close to the entrance were raised together. So there was these other stones that, remember how I told you there's the ditches and they had the two entrances? At one of the entrances, they raised two more stones to kind of be this kind of gateway into Stonehenge. And then there was 4 station stones on the Persipile. So where you got the ditches, they kind of dug more, almost like a pit on 2 ends, put some stones there, and then put some more stones on these outer ditches. And that's kind of what started forming Stonehenge as we know it today. Now, there was some more major construction that happened like 300 years later. In 22 BC, the blue stones were rearranged, and then they kind of did the same thing as the outer stones. You have the circle of the serenes. Those are the ones. Those tall stones that got like the cap on the top. Those formed an outer layer, and then another layer was the blue stones in a circle. Then you had the horseshoe of the serenes, and then once you had the horseshoe of the serenes, then you had another layer of blue stones. Is that kind of? I'll put up some pictures probably right now to kind of show you the map that I saw, to kind of show you what it looks like. Like this picture will be what it looked like 2500, and then there's the picture for 2200, and you can kind of see the progress. It's really cool because I got it off the heritage site. But this is where it kind of gets a little interesting, a little crazy. So you remember how I mentioned these blue stones? Okay, the blue stones are significant to the history of Stonehenge, and that is because the blue stones they come from the Presley Hills of South Wales. And if you look at a map, you will see that this location is 169 miles away from Stonehenge.
Yeah, no, that's a far distance. I'm gonna have a little bit of noise in the background. My brother and his wife are on vacation, and so my brother and his wife's daughter staying with us, but she is having a late night cry right now.
Oh boy.
So hopefully,
Um,
hopefully she'll be okay. But I'm gonna rely on you to do most of the
all
talking.
right, I'll carry us, man. So yeah, 169 miles away. But what makes it even crazier is these blue stones weigh 2 to 5 tons. Tons. Like you're like we're saying, this is 2,200 years before Jesus Christ. Probably before most of the Old Testament. And they're hauling stones that are 2 to 5 tons, 160 miles across distance.
It really makes you wonder how exactly are they doing this, because they don't have the cranes and modern technology we have today.
No, and so this is kind of like, so that's really all we know about Stonehenge. All of it's through radiocarbon dating, and that's kind of where it kind of can tell us the different stages, how old some of the stones are. And based off the ages of the stones is when we can kind of be able to tell these stones were placed then, these stones were placed then, these stones were placed then. And that's really all we know about the history of Stonehenge. We don't know who built it. We don't know why it was built. We don't even know how they got these stones to where they are. That's where there's some theories that people have come into. I'm going to start with one of the coolest theories out there, and it's the story of Merlin. So you know the story of King Arthur, you know the story of Merlin. There is a theory that Merlin is the one who built Stonehenge. So I found online because I looked up, like I was sitting there, I'm like, okay, what's five theories of what Stonehenge is? And the number one theory a lot of people have gone around is in folklore, the story of Arthur, the story of Merlin. Merlin is the one who built Stonehenge. So during that time, the Romans withdrew from Britain. So, the Romans came over, they attacked, then they withdrew from Britain. Once they withdrew, the Saxons saw this as an opportunity to attack. And so they started invading. Um, and now the native British, they were like, this ain't going to fly because we're going to have to go in, we're going to have to deal with them. So they started rebelling against the Saxons, and this led to a lot of bloodshed. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of bloodshed back and forth. So the Saxons and the Britons, not Briton, like the IAN, it's Briton, Briton. That's apparently I'm a Briton because my ancestry is from Britain. They decided enough's enough. We need to stop fighting. Let's come to peace. So they met at Salisbury Plain. If you know Salisbury Plain, that's where Stonehenge is. And they said, in order to keep peace, in order to make sure we're not like stabbing each other, killing each other, we really want to end this bloodshed, we'll come with no weapons. Well, the Saxons didn't keep to their agreement, and they're all kind of standing in a circle from the way that this was told. They stood in a circle, and then they would kind of like, it would be a Saxon, then a Briton, then a Saxon, then a Briton. And they stood in a circle trying to like talk and figure out peace deals, figure out what to do. The Saxons had knives, and they pulled out their knives, and every Briton to their left, they would stab them and kill them. And so every single Briton leader was slaughtered in this peace meeting. And so that led to the Saxons kind of having this upper hand for a long time and being able to, beat back, the Britons, until a British prince who was exiled to France came over. His name was Uther Pendragon. Okay. They won a major victory against the Saxons. And due to this, they wanted to honor the British chiefs who had been murdered on Salisbury Plain, and they wanted to build a monument to do it. So guess what they decided to do, according to legend?
What happened next?
Well, they called for advice. So Merlin comes in, like, what we want to build a monument to these people. What should we do? And Merlin says, there's this cool stone monument over in Ireland that was built by giants. We're gonna go steal it, national treasure style. Gonna go steal it. So
stealing 25-ton bricks is not always the easiest thing to do.
Well, when you got a wizard, it makes it a little easier. So, the man who won the major victory, his name was Ambrosius. So Ambrosius sent Merlin with Uther Pendragon to lead an expedition to Ireland to steal the giants' dance, which is what Stonehenge translates to. So a lot of fighting happened because the Irish are like, we don't want to give up our stone monument built by giants because it's kind of cool. However, Uther's warriors prevailed. They beat the Irish. They stole the monument. Of course, you're kind of like, well, how did they do this? Like, you can't just steal 2 to 5 ton stones and carry them in your pockets.
That's exactly what I was
saying. Merlin applied his stoic knowledge to uproot the stones, transport them on ships, and then re-erect the monument on Salisbury Plain, where the Saxons murdered the Britons leaders. So he's like, all right, we're going to pull these stones, we're going to haul them on a ship, build the monument. Like, we're just going to pull it piece by piece and rebuild it. Kind of like, you take a puzzle from your grandma's house, you take it apart, you put it in the box, you take it to your house, you take it out of the box, you put it back together. Um, let's see. Um, and then, of course, Ambrosius died. That was the guy I told you he won the major victory. He was buried at Stonehenge, according to legend. And then so too was Uther Pendragon. He was also buried at Stonehenge. Now, you ready for the cool part about this story? Because you're kind of like, we know Merlin from King Arthur. We know the legends of King Arthur. How does this tie to King Arthur? Uther Pendragon, okay, was the father of King Arthur.
Oh, I'm about to embarrass myself on the podcast, but yeah, I would not have made that connection. So,
See,
uh,
that's like when I heard this theory, like I always heard of Merlin and King Arthur, and I was like, this is so cool. Like, we probably will talk about King Arthur on this podcast at some point because I think it's a really cool, like, folk story. Um, I mean, just the history of it, And so, according to the legends, King Arthur was supposed to be buried at Stonehenge, but as legend states, Arthur he's apparently not dead. King Arthur's still alive, and instead got transported, badly wounded, into the Isle of Avalon to sleep and dream until his country needs him again and he'll awaken. So he never made it to Stonehenge, but his father's buried there, and then his father's best warrior. So that
some
is
interesting lore and cross there.
that
But
is probably the biggest theory is Merlin because it's a lot of. I mean, it's and so this was actually I looked it up because this story is in an actual book. Um, it's there's a full telling of this tale with a lot more detail than what I gave. It's by Kirsty Hartisotis, Wiltshire Folk Tales. It's a book. I couldn't find it on Amazon when I looked it up. It might be on Amazon. I found it on like it was on like a like thriftbooks.com. It's where I found it. But there's like a bunch of tales there and a bunch of different folk stories, not just about that. But that is one of the, I guess, the biggest that had a lot of history to it, had a lot of lore to it, had a good story to it. We'll obviously say what theories we agree with or what we think are like the best plausible ones.
I I know there's some people out there that think giants were the ones that were able to move these rocks and put them in place. So I actually think I might. I don't know if this is a theory that you have, but I'm actually going to connect the giants and the Nephilim from the Bible. So I don't know if that's one of the
It's
theories.
what's crazy is I didn't I was going to put the Giants down on here, and I forgot to put them on here. However, I did know that I was going to mention that because, like, my wife and I were talking because I was like, okay, I've got to get my notes ready for Stonehenge because I'm not doing it in 3 weeks like I thought. I'm doing it next week. Blame Steven.
Hey, Stonehenge got vandalized. I'm like, hey, now's the perfect time to
Yeah.
put on it while it's in the news. So
So yeah. So
we're
I
totally
was
correct, guys.
yeah. So I was sitting there and I was like, wouldn't it be crazy? Like we know in the Bible that there were Nephilims or giants, and I was like, one of the theories that did pop up was that giants built Stonehenge. So I'm kind of like, we're hearing that Stonehenge was probably built around 2500 BC. Around that time, I would have to look at when like the Egyptian Empire was formed and all that. But I do know that radiology, like the carbon
Right.
dating, I know carbon dating. Maddie's dad talked about this, where it's my father-in-law. He was kind of like, carbon dating probably isn't the best reliable source, and so that's where it's kind of like, okay, if you say that, if you kind of go off the idea that carbon dating could be unreliable, Stonehenge could be way older than what we're suspecting, which means it could fall around the flood time to where Nephilims were roaming the earth and then they had time to build Stonehenge, you know?
And I'll say this very quickly. For those of you that don't know who the Nephilim are, in Genesis chapter 6, you have the sons of God coming down with the daughters of men. And it says the Nephilim were there in those days and also thereafter. So we don't really know who the Nephilim were. There's theories that they're giants. I'll let. Well, I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that more.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of like I thought were like Nephilims were kind of the giants because there's like, and that'll be probably something we'll talk about if Steven's doing Beyond the Culture, but we do have a plan for him to do a Beyond the Bible podcast, and this might be something we cover on that podcast because there's like the Book of Enoch, which me and him were planning to read, which we haven't done. Oops. But the Nephilim, there's like a lot of theories and a lot of stories that the Nephilim were the ones who kind of taught humans astrology. They taught humans herbal medicine. They taught humans all these things that God didn't want us to learn yet. And that was kind of part of the reason why he wiped out the world when he did the flood. Part of it was our sin. Other part was, the Nephilim being involved and the Nephilim being around, which there is theories that Goliath was a descendant of a Nephilim. So I could definitely see, we got Merlin, we got giants. Giants could definitely be in play. If Stonehenge was built around the time of the flood, I could see giants being a part of it. It's kind of funny because me and my wife were talking. The next theory we could say is that God and Jesus were playing dominoes.
That sounds like a bad Sunday school joke.
um, so yeah, so we got Merlin. We kind of threw out an idea of giants. I've got about I got about four people or four groups that I have ideas of who it could be. And then there's a couple of like, not really who built it, but possibly why it was built that could possibly lead us to believe who could have built it. So the next group are the Druids. And the guy who came up with this was a guy by the name of John Aubrey. And he kind of came up with this idea in 1640, which was around the time like the first sort of excavation and archaeological dig of Stonehenge. This guy named John Woods kind of went with John Aubrey and said that possibly it was used for pagan rituals by Druids. But I will say this, and this is the issue with this theory, is that John Aubrey said, okay, Druids used this place. Then a guy by the name of John Woods in 1740, almost 100 years later, came back and said, I agree with what he said. I think the Druids used it for rituals. And you're probably like, William, that's a great theory. Why can't we run with that? Because upon my research, this is one of the theories that has been disproved. Radiocarbon dating, I talked about that word, radiocarbon dating, showed that Stonehenge was built in like 2500 BC. The Druids that we know today, they came from, they spawned from a Celtic society that did not form until 300 BC, almost 2,000 years after Stonehenge was built. So that's why it's kind of disproved.
Yeah, that probably would have been the theory I liked if it hadn't been disproved. So, oh well, I guess we'll move on to other ones.
Yeah, which there's some more disproving to it. Is that Druids did rituals and sacrifices in the woods and mountains because it's better for earth rituals rather than an open field. So even if radiocarbon dating can disprove it, that there also kind of disproves it because it's like, why would they build this stone structure in the middle of a field to do their sacrifices and stuff when they prefer the mountains or the woods? So that theory is knocked out. So we still got Merlin and giants and Jesus and dominoes, not the pizza.
Fun topics to talk about.
The next theory is that the Romans are the ones who built Stonehenge. This states that Romans possibly built it as a Roman temple. Again, though, this is disproved that the Romans couldn't have built it because of carbon dating, because the Romans did not show up to England until 55 BC, where Julius Caesar led them on an expedition to conquer. So now we can't say the Romans built it either. So it's not the Druids, not the Romans. I mean, we're kind of narrowing the list down, I guess, to where you could kind of pull
It's
some.
only a matter of time before we get to aliens.
I'm looking at my notes. Aliens. And the note I put below it is because why not?
Always, man. Were you watched I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but you watched those John Green videos.
Yeah.
What was it called? The history ones.
Yeah. Yeah. A crash course.
Crash Course, yeah, Crash Course World History, and they would always have that running joke with the Mongols. They're like, guys, they're like, oh yeah, generally this was true, except for wait for it, the
The
Mongols.
Mongols. And
I
now
think
it's
I
going to
think our
become a thing to where Steven's like, I bet a theory is going to be aliens. And I'm going to like, I literally, cause like I have my notes here and
man,
it's funny cause Steven's like, it's going to be aliens. And I like flipped over my notebook and the literally like right there, you can kind of see the dot and it says aliens. And I was like, he got me.
I wonder if I wonder if Will talks about aliens so much because he is an alien. You never know.
Who's to say? I'm living amongst you people, learning.
Learning, doing a
It's
podcast as a cover up.
you know what's funny is one of these episodes. Whenever like you guys want to know who plans episodes and stuff, it's usually me. I don't do the research, but I'm the one who kind of says like, okay, I'm going to do 2 episodes, and Steven's going to do 3 episodes, and I'm going to do 4 episodes. I'm usually the one that does that, and I'm usually the one that'll find the topics for us. And like probably like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was like, okay, I've got to start planning out more episodes. What could I do? And because we're talking about aliens, I had the idea to do the conspiracy theory that the pyramids were built by aliens as landing platforms, but I decided not to.
We will we will have to visit that topic at some point.
Oh, um,
Definitely, I feel like Stonehenge. The amount of theories we've gone through, we're referencing future episodes. Because like I mean, we're definitely going to do an Nephilim episode. Enoch's probably going to be somewhere in there. Aliens. We kind of already done aliens with Roswell, but I'm
but
sure
there's
Eric
so many. There's like
topic
an alien abduction story we're going to cover at some point. We've got Area 51 to talk about. We've got like,
about aliens.
oh man, we've got so many things with aliens. Oh, but the next theory is a pretty quick and another quick theory. Because I found a website and it was like listing off these different theories. And my favorite one that they put was that it was cavemen. And in my notes, it says the reason why cavemen probably built Stonehenge is because they were bored because they had no porn or video games. So they had to get rock hard in other places.
Oh man, that's there you go. There it is.
We're now gonna have a T-shirt on the store that's got Stonehenge and it says rock hard.
Oh man, why do
Have
I?
you
By the way, Will makes the merch. I don't.
Yeah,
So
I try to get my wife to help me sometimes.
there
Which
you go.
speaking of merch, I got my mug here, so go buy the merch because we just got some stickers, and we
I
should
know.
have a Beyond the Campfire hat out soon. But that's basically my theories on who the people are. We've got Merlin, we've got druids, we've got Romans, we've got aliens, we've got giants, we've got cavemen. Two of those theories have been knocked out. The druids and the Romans, not possible. Um, so really,
This might be a surprise, but I am actually the one I tend to believe is actually not the most logical explanation.
it's
And
Merlin.
I it's not Merlin. I'm actually leaning towards a Nephilim slash pre-Noahic type of reasoning because I was talking to a friend a few years ago about before the flood, and he was just saying, "Hey, we don't know what kind of things they built, what kind of advancements they had." So he said, as far as we know, Noah's civilization could have been pretty advanced, and then the flood kind of wiped everything away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, of course, there's if the flood happened, it's like would Stonehenge still be there? Probably not. But I don't know. I feel like I have. This is one of the rare occurrences where I have a more mystical alternative that I feel like is true. I feel like there probably was some kind of Nephilim, or at least some kind of giant otherworldly creature involvement. Because again, like you said, how else do you move these 25-ton stones from 140 something kilometers away or whatever it was, and then you bring it to this part of England and set it up? Like, so I don't know. So this is one of the few times where you'll have me not going for the most logical answer.
Yeah. Well, here's the crazy thing I'm going to tell you. I just looked it up because I was kind of curious. Now, this I literally looked up when was the flood of Noah based off like our calendars and stuff. Obviously, the first one from Wikipedia I don't think is plausible because it says it happened in 1300 BC, and the pyramids were built in 2700 BC. Now that's not to say that like now that's the question too. Could the pyramids have been built by giants? Maybe that's a theory for another day.
There's
Because
interesting stuff in history, and I feel like I feel like the Bible actually provides some decent, maybe somewhat vague, but some decent arguments. Because like, who are the Nephilim? How were all these things built? There might be some.
yeah, because if we go off what I just said, which is that I mean the Stonehenge was basically according to carbon dating was finished around 2200 BC, and I just said the pyramids were finished around 2700 BC. So according to Google and according to this guy named Bishop Usher, he computed according to his calculations that if you go off the early Earth theory, that the Earth was created in 4000 BC, and then the flood occurred in 2350 BC. So if we go off of that date of 2350 and we say, okay, this guy's right, this bishop is right, the earth was flooded at this time, then that means that the Nephilims were, you know, happening prior to that. That means that Stonehenge could have been built by giants, you know?
And yeah, I that is the one I'm actually leaning more towards to, which might surprise people, but I don't know what else to tell you, man. I just looking at all the theories we've talked about, um, that just seems to be the one that I kind of lean towards.
Yeah. Now, I think, and now I'm fixing to get into some theories of why people think Stonehenge was built, which could maybe help either answer who we think it could have been or lead us down more of a rabbit hole of who built this, why would they build this, that such a thing. Now, before I get into the whys, I'll kind of state who I kind of think maybe built Stonehenge. And I think it's the Saxons. I really think the Saxons could have done it. At least, you know, I think the Saxons were the ones that were majority around Stonehenge at that time. Um, it could have been, now I don't think Druids could have built it because, like we said, that wasn't possible. Now, could there have been pagans at that time that could have built it? Possibly. Um, I definitely like some of the elements from King Arthur's story. Probably not the story that, you know, they stole it from a bunch of giants in Ireland and had to fight people, but maybe that Stonehenge was erected for a monument to something that had happened prior. So I've got three theories of kind of why Stonehenge was built, like the reasonings behind it. Um, the first one is that it was a place of healing. A lot of people believe that the stones, the way they were lined up and everything, that there was, you know, something magical about it with healing. And the reason why we believe this is because when we've excavated the site, we have found wounded, like bodies that have what appears to be wounds, or that they were probably infected with some disease, and that people hoped by bringing them here that they would be healed of their, you know, worldly hurts and could be healed. Um, which kind of goes into the second reason why, which I looked it up, and this was really crazy cool. So you remember the bluestones I mentioned? They found out that when you strike a bluestone, it makes a certain noise, almost like music. So the theory is that it was used as a giant instrument. When I found looking up like the sound of bluestone and everything, a lot of the videos said, you know, it was like an hour long video on YouTube, you know, sounds of bluestone, and it was like to be almost meditative and almost soul healing and like mind healing. So it kind of went more into that, like, could this have truly just been a place of healing? And then through the bluestones, playing the bluestones, you know, people felt like, you know, would meditate and probably, you know, heal their mind and their soul and their bodies, or at least thought that. Um, and the third and final reason of why Stonehenge could have been built is that it was a place of worship. And this could almost kind of, and this is the really cool thing, is that the stone alignment is when you're looking at the altar and you're staring at the opening of the horseshoe, it is stated that the midsummer sunrise would rise. So, like the summer solstice, that sun would rise in that position. When the winter solstice happens, the sun would set in that position. So, almost like it was a clock, or a worship of the some people. I mean, this thing said it was probably a worship of the sun, but that could also be another reason that it was possibly like a clock, that they used it as a way, come on, almost like a modern farmer, like an old time farmer's almanac. Okay, this is okay. Now the sun is setting in these stones. Well, we know that that means the summer solstice is coming, or the winter solstice is coming, which means that we've got to get our crops, sowed and harvested before the winter comes. Um, so yeah, that's Stonehenge. That's the history. That's the theories of who, why, and I definitely think I'm going to take some pieces from Merlin's story. I'm going to take some pieces from, I think the theory of it being Nephilims is a very good plausible theory out of all of them. I do think that the Merlin theory, there's probably some pieces, because like I think the thing with all the folklore is a lot of it is some truth in folklore, and some of it is just made to extend the story, make the story a little bit better. So yeah, that's my thoughts. That's my theories. Steven?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely there definitely is a lot of mystery surrounding it. I don't know if we'll ever know for sure why it existed or why it was built. But I will say I do think it is something that should be preserved. It is something that it should be protected. And one of the reasons me and Will kind of rushed this episode out because we're like, man, it's awful that it got vandalized. And so hopefully this episode, through talking about its history, talking about the theories of it, perhaps we can put some awareness of why it matters and why it
Mm-hmm.
not only Stonehenge but other monuments can be protected. So,
Yeah,
um,
and that's where I'll agree with that, because you think about it, there's so many things that we've lost through history that like I would just love to like see, and to like, for example, I think about like the Great Library of Alexandria. What historical text have we lost? And you think about the great lighthouse, of Alexandria too. Like there's so many cool historical things that we've lost that probably could have answered some of our, like we as like engineers today probably could learn from, like the way that these the Pantheon was built, like all these different things. And so I think protecting Stonehenge, I think, is a good thing. Not only is it like, you might be like, oh, it's just an old building. Well, we're still learning from it. I feel like we're still trying to figure out the mystery. And I feel like that's what kind of drives us as humans, is we're always looking for the unknown, and we're always trying to solve the unknown. And that's what we do here on Beyond the Campfire.
yeah, into the unknown, exploring the mysteries of life. So good. I think I guess that'll about do it. So um, yeah.
Yep.
Well, any last minute thoughts, comments, concerns?
Well, like Steven said at the beginning, make sure you follow us on Instagram and Twitter, Beyond the Campfire, or Beyond Campfire. Steven, I think you have kind of something to tell people that is might be coming out on Sunday.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think a few weeks ago we mentioned I'd be launching a solo podcast, Beyond the Culture. And so, yeah, earlier this evening we had the first presidential debate. So, I am currently in the process of recording the first episode of Beyond the Culture, just reviewing the presidential debate, talking about other things going on in Western culture and society. So, yeah, be on the lookout for my new venture solo podcast, Beyond the Culture. That should be coming out hopefully sometime next week.
And don't expect any solo podcasts from me, man. I'm too ADHD and I'm too busy focused on doing this. So,
No Beyond the Ranch or anything like that.
I did have a thought, like Beyond the Range, like, Home on the Range, Beyond the Range. And it's just me talking about cows for 50 minutes. How many people would tune into that? So,
Haley's gonna make a clip out of that.
oh, yeah.
All right,
All
that'll do
right.
it. Thank you
That'll
guys,
do it.
and we will see you guys next week.
Yep. Steven's going to be talking about the blacks, the black Hebrew Israelites.
I was about to say the way you said that. All right.
All right. Thank you guys. See y'all.